As we tear past tipping points and climate target after climate target is missed, the inherently ecocidal nature of capitalist production has become impossible to ignore. In turn, anti-capitalist environmentalism is proliferating. Though still far from a dominant tendency, anti-capitalist rhetoric has become a firm fixture in contemporary Western environmentalism, expounded by both its celebrity activists and populist organisations. Despite this, Marxist theorisations of capital's need for environmental destruction remain largely confined to the academy, with many organised communist forces recoursing to common-sense liberal arguments. For example, that we cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. Whilst such slogans scratch at the truth, they remain short of the critique Marxism can offer. Marx's theory of the metabolic rift provides a useful starting point in approaching such critiques. Over the next few minutes, we will explore this theory, considering its role in debates between the first and second wave of modern eco-socialist thought, and its continued importance in contemporary debates around the dialectics of nature. We urge you to take this conversation forward yourselves, and we've included materials to aid with an initial group discussion on the subject in the video description. Welcome to Approaching Marxism. As John Bellamy-Foster illustrates in a groundbreaking 1999 essay, Marx's theory of metabolic rift, and his book, Marx's Ecology, the origins of the theory are found in what agricultural historians refer to as the Second Agricultural Revolution. Often dated between 1815 and 1880, this refers to the growth of a fertilizer industry and a corresponding scientific revolution in soil chemistry. Driven by widespread concerns over soil exhaustion, natural fertilizer sources were raided with increasing ferocity throughout this period. By 1837, this scramble began to push forward scientific inquiry in a serious way, with the British Association for the Advancement of Science commissioning the German chemist Justus von Liebig to research agricultural chemistry. The results of this study were published in 1840, providing the first coherent technical explanation of the role of soil nutrients in the growth of plants, and laying the basis for the production of artificial fertilizer. The first factory for this purpose was opened just 3 years later. However, rather than resolving the crisis of soil fertility, these developments deepened it, with no artificial process for producing nitrogen and greater knowledge of nutrient requirements deepening competition over limited natural reserves of this key resource. In light of this failure, Liebig began to develop an ecological critique of capitalist agriculture, arguing that agricultural production for sale gave rise to a spoliation system in his 1859 Letters on Modern Agriculture. As the crops now transported across vast distances to the market contained within them the nutrients necessary for the soil's enduring fertility, this undermined its reproduction over time. This makes agriculture for commodity markets incompatible with a rational application of soil chemistry. Liebig would go on to develop this critique further through the 1860s, notably arguing that the waste of human and animal sewage represented a similarly irrational process of soil depletion. This latter work forms the scientific basis of Marx's theory of the metabolic rift. In volumes 1 and 3 of Capital, and in the notebooks kept in preparation for these works, known as the Grundrisse, Marx builds on Liebig's understanding of agriculture by introducing his concept of social metabolism. As he explains in the first volume of Capital, and in the Grundrisse, Marx views humanity and non-human nature as standing in a metabolic relationship with each other. Crudely put, in a constant exchange of material. Human labour mediates, regulates, and controls this metabolism through its social organisation. In Capital's third volume, Marx explicitly references Liebich's understanding of capitalist agriculture's depletion of the soil, the depopulation of the countryside, and the concentration of populations in cities as provoking an irreparable rift in this metabolism. For Marx, the capitalist organisation of production has here violated the natural laws of life itself. The insights of the theoretical outlook developed by Marx from Liebich's insights span far beyond its initial basis in capitalist agricultural practice. Marx himself applies this understanding to deforestation, and Engels, his closest collaborator, to the exploitation of coal and metal reserves. More recent analysis has expanded this further, with, for example, Andreas Malm arguing that the adoption of fossil fuels enabled a rift in time and space necessary for industrial capitalist production in his 2016 book, Fossil Capital. Or Bellamy-Foster arguing that the climate and extinction crises represent a planetary rift in a 2010 book of essays, The Ecological Rift, Capitalism's War on the Earth. The fundamental significance of metabolic rift theory, however, is best illustrated by debates over the first-wave eco-socialist James O'Connor's theory of the two contradictions of capitalism. As with the rest of the modern first wave, discussed in the last episode of this series, O'Connor views Marx's critique as having nothing to say in relation to ecology. In his 1998 book, Natural Causes, he sets this out clearly, arguing that whilst Marx's critique of political economy provides a firm basis for understanding capitalism's propensity to economic crises, it has nothing to do with the conditions of production. To remedy this, he argues, Marxism requires a second theory of crisis, concerned with the way in which capitalism produces natural conditions. Luckily, this rather abstract objection is put in more concrete terms, with capitalist agriculture as an example. Whilst allowing that Marx understood capitalism's depletion of soil health, O'Connor insists that he failed to put two and two together, and did not see how capitalist agricultural practices might threaten economic crisis, or how so-called natural barriers may be capitalistically produced barriers. This is utterly incorrect. The so-called natural barrier, which necessitated a turn to fertilizer use, is the product of capitalist political economy. The depletion of soil nutrients, a result of the expulsion of people from the land and their concentration in cities, which Marx views as the genesis of capitalist production. This is explicitly addressed wherever soil fertility is considered across capital's volumes. Whilst less explicit, Marx's view that capital undermines the original sources of all wealth, the soil and the worker, or his understanding that increasing capital expenditure on means of production leads to a lower amount of value-producing labour employed in production, a pronounced feature in the relation between fertiliser use and dwindling rural populations, both directly conflict with O'Connor's argument that he did not understand that capitalist agricultural practices would lead to economic crisis. As Paul Burkett argues in his 1999 book, Marx and Nature, O'Connor arbitrarily separates the impacts of capitalist production economically and ecologically into two contradictions. In reality, these are both symptoms of a more fundamental contradiction: the dominance of exchange over production. The theory of the metabolic rift provides a powerful tool for understanding the ways in which the symptoms O'Connor separates out relate to each other and develop from this core contradiction. In recent years, the theory of metabolic rift has again come under criticism in the Marxist tendency, with a focus on how the organisation of production shapes non-human nature and its relations, often termed the dialectics of nature. Perhaps the most important of these critiques argues that whilst the theory of metabolic rift was intended to provide a conceptual device to unite Marx's critique of political economy with an ecological critique, its more recent articulations have reproduced a conceptual separation between humanity and non-human nature which undermines this. A key thinker in this vein is Jason W. Moore, author of Capitalism in the Web of Life, alongside numerous other books and articles, and co-coordinator of the World Ecology Research Network. We spoke to the comrade to get this critique in his own words.
The world ecology conversation agrees with Foster. Metabolism is crucial. Where metabolic rift theory sees a primary antagonism between society and nature, I argue for a labor theory of metabolism. This flows from Marx and Engels' philosophical insistence on what we might call a labor theory of life. Engels offered its best soundbite: labor created man. The labor theory of life is specifically dialectical and materialist. It insists that the primary antagonism of class society is the class struggle in the web of life. Classes, and above all the labor process, are not outside the web of life, but internal to it. Labor and classes not only produce environmental history, they are products of it. As Marx says in the Grundrisse, labor is a specifically harnessed natural force. This does not endow labor or nature with supernatural powers, as Marx warned in the critique of the Gotha program. A labor theory of metabolism does not mean that modes of production determine solar irradiance or volcanic eruptions. A labor theory of metabolism does allow historical materialists to explain how such geophysical events and forces have influenced the climate history of class societies. In this perspective, labor is not a property of humanity, but a relationship defined by the interpenetration of opposites. Labor is the mixing of human work through the web of life. Labor creates man. World ecology therefore argues against both labor and nature monisms and labor and nature dualisms. As Marx puts it, a being or relational entity that does not have its essence outside itself is not a being or a relational entity. The mixing of human and extrahuman natures with consciousness, class, and material life is at the heart of Marx and Engels' communist vision. Consciousness itself is a material force, Marx and Engels tell us, and communist consciousness forms the basis for new forms of cooperation as material forces. Thus, the centrality of the critique of ideology and what Lenin famously called the theoretical struggle. World ecology argues that historical materialism is, above all, historical. This includes the present as a world historical moment. Historical materialism commits us to understanding revolutionary praxis in at least two historical registers. One is the present-day unfolding of the class struggle. The other is the history of those class struggles. A labor theory of metabolism understands those class struggles concretely through their manifold expressions in the history of industry, imperialism, geocultures, and environments. World ecology therefore rejects the idealist proposition that theoretical differences can be resolved through theory. It also rejects the historicist notion that history speaks for itself. For world ecology, the proletarian standpoint must interrogate and synthesize class struggles as metabolic contradictions. The overcoming of bourgeois alienation is fundamental, not only to labor's emancipation, but to the liberation of all life. For this reason, world ecology is distinctive in its emphasis on world history. For a quarter century, I have argued that the origins of capitalism and the origins of planetary crisis were two sides of the same world historical coin. The Capitalocene concept, for instance, contends that the rise of capitalism occurred through a violent and epical environment-making revolution in labor landscape relations. Simply put, the emergence of capitalism was an unprecedented labor metabolic revolution. From the Dutch and English enclosures to the silver mines of Potosi to Brazil's great sugar plantations, this first era of primitive accumulation was irreducibly socio-ecological. The new labor regimes were distinct but combined and always metabolic. Proletarianization assumed different forms across the Atlantic, from the Andes to the Low Countries. Each moment generated distinctive labor metabolic contradictions and contributions to world accumulation. The outcomes were gruesome and dynamic, at each step producing new socio-ecological contradictions between what Marx called the soil and the worker on the one hand, and the imperialist bourgeoisie on the other. This metabolic reading of capitalist history as the class struggle in the web of life shapes our understanding of planetary crisis in later eras. The labor metabolic contradictions of the plantation system, for example, directly financed the era of coal and steam power that began in earnest after 1830. Industrial capitalism's metabolic contradictions were resolved through a new global metabolic fix in the new imperialism and the rise of monopoly capitalism at the end of the 19th century. World ecology offers these historical sketches as contributions to eco-socialist praxis. For my comrades and I, theoretical struggles conducted by revolutionaries must be adjudicated on the terrain of praxis, including the debate over world historical turning points, patterns, and transitions. The irony is that Foster, in attacking the world ecology tendency for its alleged idealism, reproduces its own form of idealism. The Metabolic Rift School has organized its attacks on world ecology theoretically, rather than through an interpretive struggle over capitalism's actually existing patterns and turning points.
Bellamy-Foster has responded to some of these criticisms in a number of essays, most directly in a 2016 article, Marxism in the Anthropocene, Dialectical Rifts on the Left. The core of his argument in this piece is that his theory of the metabolic rift does not reproduce a division between human and non-human nature, but separates these out for analysis alone, and that Moore's criticism is fundamentally linguistic. Rather, Bellamy-Foster argues, Moore's approach renders capitalism more real than nature, amounting to a form of social monism. Though any serious resolution to this impasse requires a great deal of work, it is worth pointing to a consequence of Bellamy-Foster's position. As Moore notes, the natural limits fundamental to Bellamy-Foster's conception of the metabolic rift invoke a Malthusian concept of Earth overshoot theory, which reduces human impacts on the environment to a combination of population, affluence, and technology. Neither class nor the manner in which non-human nature and its laws are shaped by human systems of production feature in this framing, entailing at least a muddying of the ecological conception of Marx's critique of political economy, which Bellamy-Foster intends to rescue across his work. Despite the contest still surrounding the concept, Marx's theory of the metabolic rift has clarified the central questions which any movement towards sustainable social development must grapple with. Far from being reducible to the canards of liberal environmentalism, the climate and extinction crises present complex questions on the relationship between human systems of production and non-human nature, which require concrete analysis of class and the natural world. The theory of the metabolic rift provides a powerful conceptual framework for glimpsing them. This is evidenced not only by the impact it has had in contemporary Marxist approaches to these questions, but also by its enduring scientific legacy. As Bellamy-Foster notes in his initial treatments of the concept at the end of the 1990s, and gives systematic treatment in his 2020 book, The Return of Nature, the theory has held a massive influence on contemporary ecological science, clearing the way for many concepts now fundamental to this discipline. We hope this short discussion has provided a window into the broad contours of this theory, the debates which have surrounded it in recent history, and its political importance. Now, it's over to you.